Hey, badass black girls, and they making big moves. Hey, badass black girls, nothing that you can't do. They are the future, I'm trying to tell ya. They want the best, no time to settle. They got the strength to handle the pressure. These are the queens, nobody better. Yeah, changing the narrative, that is imperative. They about to rock this. Tell the women that you got this. Got no time for people who are toxic. It's all love, good vibes. You know I got your back, girl. Talking issues that matter. This is badass black girl, yeah.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of Badass Black Girl. And with us today, we have the wonderful Amina Gautier. Hi Amina, would you introduce yourself?
Hi MJ, Happy New Year. So I am Amina Gautier if you speak French, and if you speak Spanish, I am Amina Gautier. I'm a fiction writer. I've published about 127 short stories. I am also a scholar of American and I'm so tongue twisted. I'm so excited to be here with MJ. You guys have to excuse me. I'm also a scholar of 19th century American literature and African American literature. Sometimes I live in Miami, which is how I know the great MJ, and I teach at the University of Miami.
I'm still trying to recover from the fact that you've written 127 stories.
That's just how many I've published. I've written more than that.
No. Oh my God, this is so awesome. This is wonderful. But before we talk a little bit about your writing, let's start with the basics. Tell us about your name, Amina Gautier, so beautiful. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and how did you get to have such a cool last name?
Well, thanks. I am a badass black girl from Brooklyn, New York, the BK. What's up? As you can see, I'm black, but I think you probably won't know unless you're from Puerto Rico or New York, but I'm also Hispanic, which is why I have this lovely, beautiful picture of the beach beside El Morro behind me, which is in Puerto Rico. So my last name came from my grandfather, who is Puerto Rican. And in Puerto Rico, they pronounce it Gautier, but my grandmother is not Puerto Rican. She's African American, and she didn't know how to pronounce it. So she always said Gautier. And then as soon as I got to school, people looked at it and it looked French to them, even though it's missing, either the L or the H. And so as soon as I started school, I became Amina Gautier. So it's kind of like having a nom de plume without really having to change my name. So I answer to the English, the Spanish, and the French pronunciations.
This is so awesome. It's like your name alone is a story. And this leads us to your writing career. Tell us a little bit. I mean, there are so many facets to your writing. You're a short story writer. Some of the stories have been published. Some of them you are waiting to be published. Some of them you're still working on. Tell us a little bit what is out there already that people can find if they want to support you or discover that wonderful world that you've created with your books.
Sure. So only about maybe 33 to 35 of the stories are collected in books. I have 3 short story collections, all of which came out between 2011 and 2016. The first collection is called At Risk. It has 10 short stories in it. And it's set during the late 80s to mid 90s during the crack epidemic in New York. It focuses on at-risk kids. That was a phrase that we were using a lot in the 80s and 90s, underprivileged, at-risk, to marginalized children of color. So the stories, there are 10 stories, 5 of them look at-risk kids who make it, right? Who get scholarships and get into private schools, or they enter enrichment programs and they sort of escape the dangers of their neighborhoods. And the other half of the stories are about the kids who don't make it and who fall through the cracks. That collection won the Flannery O'Connor Award, and I became the second Black woman to win that prize. 3 years later, my second collection, Now We Will Be Happy, came out, and that one I got to play a little bit more with my background. So half of the stories in that collection are about New Yorkers who, left Puerto Rico or who were born in New York and only go back to visit, who may or may not speak Spanish. And the other half of the stories are about Afro Puerto Ricans. So African Americans who are married to Puerto Ricans or children of that partnership, all the different ways of exploring biculturalism that is not necessarily biracial. And the title of that story comes from a song that I really love. Hector, I'm sorry, there's a different song. I'm getting so tongue twisted. I'm so excited to see MJ. I haven't seen her in like a year. But the title of that collection comes from a song called Ahora que seremos felices, which is Now We Will Be Happy in Spanish. So I just translated it to English. There's a lot of music in that collection. And the last collection came out about a year and a half after the second one. It's called The Loss of All Lost Things. And that one is not set in a specific place, like not Puerto Rico or not New York. The stories take place all over the country, New York, Philly, Massachusetts, lots of different places. And it's kind of the sad collection. You know, it deals with different forms of loss. So all different permutations of that concept. So not just death and grief, but kidnapping, sex trafficking, people who've lost their jobs, who've lost their identities, all different forms of loss and losing. And that is the last collection. All the rest of the stories have come out in individual journals. About 30 of them are flash fictions. Some of them, I'm more of a literary realist writer than a speculative writer, but I have a handful of stories that are speculative. Some of them look at fairy tales. Some of them look at classical Greek and Roman mythology. I have a series of stories, about 8, which I've been working on since 2016, which are inspired by Black Lives Matter movement, different things that kind of made me feel that I had to write something or say something when I saw the conversations about the Confederate monuments, the conversations about Karens, about the different shootings and killings of innocent, unarmed, over-policed Black adults, Black children, Black drivers. So I have a couple of stories that just came out in the last couple of years just because I couldn't get those things off my mind. So I guess you could say I just write about whatever occurs to me at the moment. It makes me feel strongly enough that I have to speak about it.
Was it always this way, or you can somehow retrace your trajectory from when you just maybe at the beginning wrote with uncertainty? Because I believe every writer at some point wasn't sure what they wanted to focus on, because there are so many ideas. Where do you even start? And did you find yourself really finding your own groove, or is it a groove that changes depending on your mood, on the locale that you choose to write? How does that work for you, the whole writing process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to be free to write, whatever I want, and to write, whatever the mood inspires. So what I'm interested in always changes. But there are times where I think that, I'm tired of a topic, or I've finished saying what I have to say about it. And then I'll notice like 5 stories later that I'm writing about that again. Like I never sit down and say, I'm going to write about this one particular thing. Like I don't want writing to feel like work. I want it to feel like joy. And for me, one of the things that happens is when I write, I find out after I've written the story, like what was on my mind, or what was in my subconscious, or what I was concerned about. So for instance, with those 3 collections, I actually wrote most of the stories for them all at the same time. I didn't like sit down and write one collection and then sit down and write another collection. I've just been writing for like 10 years because I tried to publish an agent, didn't really go so well. I thought the advice that the agent gave me was really formulaic and not artistic. And I said, maybe this person is condescending to me because they think I'm young. I was like 24 at the time. And I said, I'm just going to write for 10 years and see what comes out, and then try again. And, hopefully I'll get some more respect. So I just wrote for 10 years, and I ended up with about 50, 55 stories, and I just spent the summer rereading them, looking at them, and they kind of divided out into 3 piles, and 11 of the stories were about at-risk kids. I took one out and it became the first collection. And then I had about 8 stories about Afro-Puerto Ricans, and I wrote like 3 more, and that became Now We Will Be Happy. And I had about 16 stories about loss, and I took 1 or 2 of them out, and I took one story, split it in half, and that became The Loss of All Lost Things. So like most of those stories were actually written all around the same time, and I would just go from one topic to the next, because I don't like to be bored. So if I write about kids or adolescents in one story, the next story is not going to be about kids. It'll be about adults. If I write in second person this week, the next story is going to have a completely different point of view, because I don't want to keep writing the same thing. So,
which leads me to the next question. So I remember I was watching an interview with Chris Rock, and he was talking about the amount of research it takes to become a stand-up comic, because you have to know everything that's going on, and you have to reflect on it, and then come up with jokes that encapsulate your sensibilities and the importance of what's going on in the world. And that interview got me thinking back then about what it takes to be a proficient writer, because some people believe that it's all matter of inspiration and your personal take on the world. But I know you as an academic. I know that you research a lot, that you have strong opinion about things, and that those opinions are usually based on facts and research. You basically know what you're talking about. It's never like, I believe that, without anything to back it up. So if you were to tell us a little bit about things that you think every writer should do, and this question is mostly to help those of us who are emerging writers, what are some of the things that writers absolutely need to do, in your opinion, to be proficient at what they're doing, in addition to working on their craft at the sentence level?
Okay, well, you're gonna have to stop me if I go too long and just say, Amina, shut up, that's enough. So some things that I think writers really should do to become proficient, besides reading more and working on their craft, like you said, this one is maybe a little bit controversial. I think that writers should not tell people what they are working on. And I know that as writers, we are isolated, we work alone, and we're sitting there with the page for weeks or months or years. So it feels good to reach out to somebody and, to have someone say, oh, this is great, or to tell them your idea and to kind of get that like little oomph and that vote of confidence. But I actually really, truly believe that it does more harm than good. It takes so much mental energy and whatever kind of other energy you want to say, creative energy, spiritual energy, psychic energy, psychological energy, to sit your butt down in a chair and not get up, right? So whatever that looks like for you. I know some people like to write in the morning, an hour or 2 a day. Me, I personally like to binge write. So I wait until I have uninterrupted time and I sit down for 8, 10, 12 hours. But it takes a lot of energy to do that, and then to revise and then to keep doing it. And when you haven't finished the story yourself and you're giving it away to other people, I'm going to write about this, and then this is going to happen, and then this is going to be like that. You basically just gave away all of your energy that you need to make you sit down and continue writing. And then by the time you finally sit down and write, your story feels tired to you. You're already bored of your own story because you've been blabbing about it and telling everybody else about it for years. And now it doesn't feel fresh and new. And one of the things that I've noticed is that most of the writers who spend a lot of time talking about what they're going to do, when I look at them and I follow up 3, 4, 5, 6 years later, they still haven't done it. And it's nobody's business but your own and maybe the publisher who's paying you. So by keeping it close to my chest, it remains fresh to me. I can remain excited about it and energized about it. And I think that, it would be really helpful to writers to kind of keep their ideas close to their chest until it's almost ready to go out into the world. I think that's really important. Another thing, I mean, these are not like craft things, like these are kind of like life skill things, but I think that as writers, we need them. I think writers need to turn their phones off and unplug, you know, and as you said, I'm an academic. So, you know, I work in an environment where people want me to respond to emails all day long or to phone calls. And those things may be very good for administering things in a university or for teaching, but those things are not good for the artistic practice. You know, beautiful, genius literary work cannot be achieved when you are checking your phone every 5 minutes. You know, when you're tweeting with someone, like beautiful writing takes time to focus and to concentrate. And, you know, I mean, obviously it's a privilege, right? Like everybody doesn't live in the kind of world or environment or the family situation where they can pull back and go to a writer's residency or go to an archive. But whatever kind of situation you can create for yourself, even if it's like sitting in your car, you know, for a half an hour, where you can just silence the distractions, I think that's really important. Like I'm not an organized person. I don't write outlines. I don't sit down with goals. I don't say I'm going to write X number of words a day. I don't say I'm going to write X number of hours a day. But I do give myself time to be quiet and to be still and to sit there for as long as it takes. Like I've noticed that if I, sit down to write, the first 2 hours are just crap. You know, maybe other people write beautifully as soon as they sit down, but for me, it's like a lot of mental push and pull, right? Because your brain is like, we want to watch TV. You know, we want to go on Facebook. We want to tweet. We want to watch superhero movies of Star Wars. And I mean, obviously I'm always down for Star Wars, right? So I have to like tell my brain, like, stop, we're going to sit here and write. We're not going to do laundry. We're not going to go to Walmart. And you shut all those distractions down. And the first 2 hours of writing are just cliches, just adverbs, but people's eyes are blue like the sky and people are craning their neck and, smiling widely. But if you stay, right, and you keep writing, all of a sudden that terrible cliche writing disappears. And like hour 3 or 4, you're getting new metaphors and new sentences and new concepts and new ideas for how to move your plot or how to execute your story structure or your point of view. But you can't get that if you are constantly available to people and you're constantly allowing yourself to be distracted. I feel like I need to say that because maybe there are writers who are watching this vlog who need to give themselves permission to do that. Right. You think about all the beautiful music that you listen to, those musicians, they go into the studio and they don't come out. Like people don't keep bothering them every 5 minutes. A sculptor, he or she is like working with that piece of marble, not like checking on their phone. And we are artists in that same vein, and we deserve as much time and focus and concentration as other art forms take. Because I can say like 10 million more things and I can see your face. You're like, Amina, shut up.
No, I want to say more. I was going to ask you about your schedule. I know that you don't have specific goals in terms of word count and stuff like that, but do you try to have a specific schedule where you write in the morning or in the evening? How does it work for you in terms of finding the time to actually write?
Yeah, I am no good to anybody for anything in the morning. So that never happens. It's a funny thing because, you asked earlier about like how things change. And when I was in grad school in the PhD program, I had like all this extra time, right? Because seminars were just like 3 hours a day, like 2-3 times a week. And I just had all this time and I could just sit there and write all the time. And I was like, this is what life is going to be like. This is awesome. This is so great. And then I got like a tenure track job and it wasn't like that. They were like, yeah, you teach 3 days a week, but you have committees on the other day and department meetings. And I was like, what happened to all my time to write? And I started like getting into this mode, which is maybe one of the reasons that I continue to write short stories, where I would just try to write like Thursday to Sunday, because those were the only days I could get it in because I don't like to be interrupted. So if I started like writing on a day I was teaching, I would probably never make it to the university. My students would be in the classroom like, where's Dr. Gautier? And I'm like, she's home on the computer writing a story. So I was trying to squeeze it into those weekends, and then using the summers and the academic breaks, right, the winter break. And what I've done is really use writers' residencies or artists' residencies, writers' colonies, whatever you want to call that, to really help me get my writing done. So during the semester, like that time is for the students. I have graduate students, they need to be mentored, they need to be nurtured, and I have certain duties to them. And I also have duties to just the literary world. If I want to be a good literary citizen, if I want to promote the work of writers of color, of women, of marginalized writers, I have to, sort of do those things during the semester. So that's when I'm judging contests or reviewing books or, those sort of things. And I just write by hand during the semester. I carry spiral notebooks, and I just handwrite with a pen or a pencil, and I fill it up. And then on the weekends, I type up everything that I've written. And then when there's an academic break, a winter break, or a summer break, I just cram and I just write as much as I possibly can. That's what my life looks like right now, ever since I came to the University of Miami and got tenure, because there have been more duties and responsibilities that come with tenure that really reduce my time to write and be creative. But who knows what things will look like, as my career progresses.
Let's talk a little bit about the pandemic, since we're talking about things that are influencing your time and changing the way you function. What has changed since the pandemic in terms of your writing, and whether it's in terms of time or I know that you mentioned writing a little bit about recent